Hello everybody, this is PhD candidate Ceren. Today I'm going to present you my article which calls An Observation of Contemporary Conservation Approaches Conserving the Memory and Identity of 20th Century Architecture for the 4th International Conference of Contemporary Affairs in Architecture and Urbanism held by Alanya University. This article that I'm presenting you today is produced by the master thesis of the author, written in 2020 under the supervision of Professor Dr. Kovan in EMU. The presentation that is presenting today is produced under the 6 different categories, which can be stated as introduction, research aims, methodology, literature, assessment and discussion, conclusions and recommendations. As we all know, cultural heritage is a very dynamic expression that improves both the term and the field. Nevertheless, the evolution of value in the process of conservation is still much debated. Although conventional values such as oldness and historicalness are widely approved by the common sense, some fundamentals such as memory and identity are still not accepted to be needed preservation. Hence, today, conservation of 20th century architecture is dependent on the preference of local authorities. And local authorities' preferences are changing according to their benefits. Correspondingly, many countries are facing the risk of deterioration and losing their authenticity and history. The built environment is one of the ever-changing phenomena of daily life and architecture. The built environment shows a constant changing and, in this way, turning itself into the witness that carries all the traces of life from past to today. Since any deterioration or demolition in the built environment may cause permanent changes, any intervention or change can only accept in such a way that contributes to heritage identity and authenticity, of course without deteriorating the existing values and special characteristics. As we should understand this, it is important to understand what is the heritage identity and authenticity, while understanding and evaluating what is the existing values of heritage and what is the special characteristic of heritage. Even there are international conservation principles to guide this significant task and valuation of value. Yet, following the limits and criteria of conservation is conditioned by the national legislation of each country. Therefore, mostly there is a gap between the national and international legislation of each country, which, unfortunately, most of them causes the deterioration and losing of authenticity. The ignorance towards physical expresses and correspondingly practiced interventions create a risk towards the culture and heritage, together with memory and identity of both individual and collective. 20th century product is still neither fully understood nor seen as a heritage that should pass through the generations among common sense in many countries, such as Turkey. Starting from these premises, the study aims to carry the debate on a common ground based upon a specific country, and examples to develop constant and logical approaches to architectural heritage of 20th century. And therefore, the study aims to identify both positive and negative approaches to understand why modern architectural heritage has frequently been faced the danger of destruction or deterioration, and what are the main reasons behind those common biases and dilemmas, and what are the effects of existing conservation attitudes on heritage, identity, and memory. Doing so, the argument and method are structured in such a way that displays the existing full conditions of modern heritages and reacts to the course of unfortunate events that is seen too much over the 20 years in Turkey, especially. Substantial and proper evaluation and preservation of modern architectural heritage are discussed based on the presented examples from the same context and period, so that we can follow how it develops and how the approaches can affect the same context. Concerning the memory and identity of heritage, the assessment criteria have gathered the manners that presented the effective way of approaching the architectural heritage and its value for enhancing the limits and efficiency of conservation. Doing so, for assessing the architectural heritage, heritage identity is framed, and in this way, basic tangible aspects of selected cases related to environment and setting are identified. At the same time, for the evaluation of selected sample buildings, in the modern conscious law of conservation, a value analysis card has been framed. With the card, valuation of significance of heritage has been introduced through the analysis of several features. With a simple statement, it is important to understand what is the conservation. Conservation is an integral act committed to protecting heritage from attrition effects of changes in urban environment and human interface. Although cultural heritage and correspondingly cultural heritage values being terms are as old as society itself, yet all those terms are constantly reinterpreted or revised. Therefore, it is much more necessary to have a good grasp of entire development process of field of conservation, instead only focusing on identified terms or well-accepted approaches. Uh, in this way, it is really important to understand the main turning point of the field, which is the questioning of value. Appreciating the heritage and its particular heritage value is a crucial and necessary. And starting with this idea, literature examines what is cultural heritage values and why the cultural heritage values is important and how we should approach and to this term to understanding the tangible and intangible bonds uh, that cultural heritage have. As we can say that the tangible and intangible bonds play a critical role as a complementary factors for social and cultural collectivity. Therefore, the developmental, social, and memory values of 20th century architectural heritage are considered evidential that how much it is necessary to be preserved for cultural integrity and richness. And second of all, in literature, memory and identity is analyzed and trying to understand. As we can understand the holistic connections between the built environment, heritage, identity, and memory is necessary for the continuity and integrity of society. And it is very important to understand if the past change, the present will be affected. And accordingly, if the present change, the future will be affected. And keeping all this in mind, assessment, the selected cases is identified according to being public eye. And there was no intention to debate the success of specific intervention or specific cases, yet present a concern in constant manners concerning the loss of value and memory and identity and diversity was the main aim while selecting these cases. So, aiming to highlight both inconstant and insensitive approaches to understand what what is the main biases and dilemmas and how we should approach, why this is happening and why it's not happening. Therefore, it creates a value analysis card as is shown and started to analyze two cases that is selected. One can be identified as positive, one can be identified as a negative. As, as you can see on the right side, the Iller Bank, the Province Bank, is the demolished case, which can be considered as a negative approach, is analyzed. And from this, conservation of 20th century architecture is discussed and try to understand the much resulting and generating dilemmas based on perspective of cultural heritage values. As we can say that the evolution of 20th century architecture has fallen behind modern conservation consciousness, and the existing conservation manners and approaches still have legal gaps in the process of identification, evaluation, registration, and conservation of 20th century heritage. These controversial and inconstant legal issues have led society many losses, which is very unfortunate. And second case is shown under the page, which is the Ceren Modern Museum. This is identified as a positive approach. Architecture with its various types of structures is one of the phenomena of culture. Therefore, architectural styles within the dimension of time, place, and commonly represent all the past presence of the society with its authentic specialties and progress. Even if it is difficult to conserve all the social, cultural references and values in a dynamic built context, it should be conscious that any change, distraction, or deterioration is permanent. So it is very important how we approach this cultural heritage, how we are taking care of them, how we are maintaining, and how we are conserving them for the sake of identity, memory, culture, and heritage. From all this discussion and the case analysis that is been telling you, not so much detail and as much as detail. The definition and evaluation of modern heritage in developing countries such as Turkey is seen as not enough, interested, or acceptance. The major problems of contemporary conservation approaches in Turkey is the conflict between relevant institutions, lack of binding control mechanisms, inconsistency in between authorities and professionals, legal gaps between national regulations and international principles, the unsatisfactory conservation consciousness. And the 20th century heritage has been not fully understood or been neglected. This is the second conclusion that is reached. Destructive or harmful approaches toward the 20th century heritage must be based on lack of interest or appreciation, deterioration in tangible and intangible aspects due to the lack of public or administration awareness, insensitive profit-oriented approaches, that mostly cause degeneration or destruction. At the same time, constructive or positive are mostly based on the proper documentation and identification, comprehensive evaluation of value, regular maintenance, sensitive conservation approaches. And understanding all these results based on the assessment of cases, it is concluded that the architectural character and socio-cultural values of modern buildings should be evaluated in a broad sense. The 20th century buildings should be defined and evaluated as a cultural heritage that needed to be conserved. The 20th century buildings should be regarded as architectural products of yesterday. The cultural significance or social roles of each architectural heritage may change, yet maintaining authenticity and special characteristics has positive effect on society. The contextual features and functional roles may change, yet alterations should be responsive to the architectural and contextual aspects. The 20th century buildings should be promoted as a cultural heritage, and raised awareness should be expanded. Thank you for your listening and patience. If there's a question, I will be glad to answer.